Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to day 3 of the Zero Project Conference 2022. As you can see, it is only me here on stage, but we have an absolutely fantastic lineup virtually with us. A lot of busy schedules we had to align, and we're very thankful that we can have this fantastic lineup with us today under the session titled Cities and the Countdown to Zero. What do we mean by zero? By zero we mean aspiring to urban environments with zero barriers. Making a city truly smart. We like to talk about smart cities, but if a city is only accessible to 70 or 80% of its population, it is neither smart or neither an inclusive city. And the speakers we'll hear today in their respective cities and municipalities are changing that, are showing us ways, proven ways, with quantitative and qualitative data to back up, that have removed barriers for all. And before we get started, I'd like to briefly verbally describe myself. My name is Robin Tim Weiss. I'm the manager of the public sector here at the Zero Project. For those of you who can hear me, but perhaps not see me, I'm a white male in his early 30s. I am wearing a blue dress shirt and a dark green tie. I have a cast in my right hand due to a recent hand injury, and I have a receding hairline because that is what happens as one gets older. So that is me. I'll be chairing and moderating through today's session, which will be 60 minutes long and which will feature 3 of our Zero Project awardees of the year 2020 from the city of Zagreb, from the city of London, and from the city of Curitiba. So Croatia, United Kingdom, Brazil, a truly global compact which we've brought together here. But in order to get started, and I think to give us a good primer and impulse statement for today's conversation, which will be, as mentioned, about how cities are removing barriers for persons with and without disabilities, I would like to invite Geraldine Guille, who works in the Technical Assistance and Capacity Building Unit at the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, to introduce a brand new project and a brand new framework for cities, which is putting human rights and within that disability inclusion front of center in the conversation, and it's a really exciting project we would like to bring to everyone's attention. And without further ado, Geraldine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Geraldine Guille, indeed. I work at the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights, and it's really a great pleasure and honor to be among you today to talk indeed about this new framework. But talk about it also among those really distinguished cities and their practices, because it's indeed at the local level that many things happen in human rights. Indeed, I work for the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, which is indeed limited to the European Union, which is already quite a big number of member states. I can hear myself a little bit. I hope everything is fine. No?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Okay, very good, very good. So the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights is the center of expertise for the European Union on fundamental rights issue. Our agency collect data, do research. We cooperate with a lot of actors, in particular also national, local, but also civil society, and we raise awareness of fundamental rights in the European Union. Next slide. We work on a wide range of topics and themes, in particular on right of the child, equality and non-discrimination, access to justice, and of course equality and non-discrimination is a big part of our work, and in that sense we have had quite a few years of work in the area of disability and persons with disability. We can go to the next slide, please. The slide number 3. So our work has been actually on Of course, the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability, the UNCRPD. So its implementation in the European Union. We cooperate with member states in order to provide an annual update of this implementation of the CRPD. We also work on two particular areas of the CRPD, political participation and the right to independent living. So those are our subject of a lot of work and project. We had quite a few actions in this regard. We also have work on indicators based on the information and the data that we collect. We don't only work from purely on as a project, but also we mainstream disability around different themes of the FRA work. So for instance, in different survey and project related to Roma, related to the right of the child, we look also at the aspect of disability in this on this project, on this information. Regarding the next slide, please. Person with disability in the European Union, we have quite an extensive framework. I would like to mention, of course, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, which is the Bills of Rights of the European Union, and the Article 26, and I quote, recognize the person with disability to benefit from to measure their independence, social and occupational integration, and participation in the life of the community. Article 17, of course, of the European Pillar of Social Rights recognize the right to live in dignity, to service, to participate in the labor market and in society, and in a work environment that is adapted to their needs. In addition to this really important legal document, there is also the European Accessibility Act and the European Disability Strategy 2021-2030, which are also two policy, very ambitious aspect for the European Union to fulfill their responsibility in terms of accessibility, but also beyond. However, what the FRA works demonstrate is that in terms of accessibility, there is only 15 member states at this stage who have mandatory accessibility standards at national and local level. So there is still a long way to go for the other member states to join in. And of course, many of our projects and data collected highlight the gaps between the CRPD and the actual practice in day-to-day life. Within this, I mentioned the national and the local authority. The local authorities, of course, have a very important role to play to ensure equal access to persons with disability. Much of the day-to-day of city work is about providing access to services, public services related to education, housing, transportation, healthcare. So delivering these public services needs to be equal for everybody. Managing the public space, supporting social inclusion. So these are among the really area that are part of the day-to-day work of cities. And that is independently whether it's a local authority or region or more urban or more rural. So this needs to be applicable everywhere. I mentioned quite a few work, if we can go to the next slide, about FRA on disability, but we have indeed also worked recently with a few cities on human rights and how to integrate more human rights into this day-to-day practice. This is usually a rather challenging for city to integrate human rights. There is now quite a lot of practices and much experience that has been developed on thematic issue of human rights, but not so much on having a human rights lens in a more global way. And this is extremely important because having a thematic approach helps to really tackle a particular issue, but it's really important also to ensure social cohesion and have a more broader vision of human rights, so not only purely looking from a thematic perspective. And in that regard, the example of Human Rights City was very interesting to draw from. A Human Rights City is a city that is self-proclaimed as a human rights city. but commit to fulfill and respect and promote human rights. And not only they do a commitment, a formal declaration, but also they put in place mechanism and tools to actually support this commitment. And that has been really particularly interesting. So we worked with a group of cities and other practitioners, and we developed a particular framework that was launched last year. That framework aims to provide guidance for city to integrate human
Dear
rights in the
Geraldine,
day-to-day
a friendly 1-minute notice.
All right. That framework helps to also better assess their own work and find inspiration. So if we can go to the next slide, the framework is based on 3 strands: foundation, which is the commitment to the human rights, structure, which are really concrete mechanism and procedure. For instance, having an anti-discrimination office, a participatory body to actually support the commitment. And then the tools, which are methods and tools to actually support the structure and human rights work. Tools is mostly the human rights-based approach. So that framework is actually rather flexible because it's not about implementing it right away, but it's actually a very flexible way to address human rights in day-to-day work. If we can go to the conclusion in the next slide. So that framework, which is presented very quickly at this stage, is actually rather easy to use, not only from a human rights perspective, but also from thematic work. So in that sense, what is really important is for city to consider what are the foundation, what are the structure, and what are the tools that can help them to actually fulfill the human rights priorities that they need to address. So I really encourage you to look at this new framework. There will be a short booklet that will be launched by FRA in a few languages over the year. And we have also a few more work on disability coming up, a focus paper and some work related to incubators, indicators, sorry. So I hope this could continue to support your work. And don't hesitate
Geraldine.
in the next slide to look at the video about what is a human rights city, to mobilize more city to join this interesting initiative.
Very exciting
very
next steps coming up, Geraldine, and we'll definitely revert back to those in the Q&A of our session, in which we can go in a bit more detail what the next steps are for this great framework and how potential cities can join. So we look forward to doing that. But without further ado, and now having received this wonderful impulse statement from Geraldine and the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, underlining the need for a human rights-centric approach, I would like to introduce our first speaker, which is joining us from the city of Zagreb, Mrs. Marinka Bakula-Andelic, the Deputy Head of the Office for Social Protection and Persons with Disabilities from the city of Zagreb. And Marinka, we would love to hear about how you are making the city of Zagreb more accessible. And without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Zero Projects team. Thank you for, in the name of the city of Zagreb. We are proud to be participating in this event and to be able to present our project. Please. Okay. Accessible Zagreb is more than just a digital journey planner. It is a service providing citizens and visitors of Zagreb with 3 layers of accessibility information. The first layer provides information on accessibility of individual buildings, the second of streets and roads, and the third layer provides information on accessibility of public transport. We are developing this service for over 100,000 persons with disabilities living in Zagreb, and also for persons with limited mobility living in or visiting Zagreb. Next slide, please. Accessible Zagreb was developed based on handbook Zagreb for Guide for Persons with Disabilities. The handbook was first published in 2001 and has been adapted on a regular basis. It contains information on more than 2,500 objects divided into categories such as education, health, social welfare, sport, culture, etc. The data was collected in cooperation with the Association of Persons with Disabilities of Croatia, named SOIH, which is an umbrella organization of all the disability organizations for persons with disabilities. Together, we have developed a methodology based on the accessibility regulations for persons with disabilities and persons with reduced mobility. The handbook was converted into a web service and a mobile app in 2019, making it more interactive and accessible. We have done this by organizing a hackathon with local students and startups. Next slide, please. In 2020, we started working with the University of Zagreb, Faculty of Geography, on mapping of accessibility of roads. The mapping targeted motorized wheelchairs users. The information has been added to the Accessible Zagreb service. Algorithm was created which helps users navigate from point A to point B, avoiding mapped obstacles. Please, next slide. We are currently implementing Horizon 2020 project under short name TRIPS. The goal of the project is development of digital solutions for a more inclusive public transportation. Within this project, we are mapping accessibility of public transport. We have close coordination with our public transport providers, Zagreb Electric Tram and Croatian Railways. The information will be added to the Accessible Zagreb service by the end of this year. Please, next slide. Development of Accessible Zagreb service is based on collaboration with academy, private and non-profit sector. The end users have been involved in the process from the beginning to the end. Persons with disabilities and hackathon participants have been involved in the process from the beginning. We are now developing a system which will allow citizens to participate and add accessibility data to the Accessible Zagreb service. Finally, Accessible Zagreb is a digital service in continuous development based on the needs of citizens with limited mobility. Please, next slide. Accessible Zagreb targets all people with limited mobility. It also promotes use of pedestrian zones and public transport, which helps reduce the carbon footprint. Accessible information provided by the Accessible Zagreb service serves at the base for improving city-wide infrastructure. Finally, development of the service has improved cooperation between key stakeholders in the field of accessibility. Next slide, please. We have reserved sufficient funds for the regular maintenance of the service, but we plan to grow the service through a crowdsourcing platform. At this point, we have volunteers who are conducting the mapping. We are planning on developing a curriculum for mapping of roads with the University of Zagreb. They will allow every generation of students to participate in the development of Accessible Zagreb. Finally, we are planning additional EU funding for the development of this service. Please, next slide. There are still many things we need to do. We need to grow our database of objects and map the entire city. We want to integrate our special transport for persons with disabilities in the service. We plan to implement data on public amenities. We are currently in the process of implementing public transport data. We want to allow for integration of new assistive technologies. The service is accessible to persons with sensory impairments, and we are working with their representatives developing features that are important for them. Our main goal is a door-to-door service that provides information in the mobility and accessibility of people with all types of disabilities. And finally, we would like to help other municipalities in Croatia or in Europe to develop such a service. Thank you for your attention.
A perfect call to action, Marinka, at the very end, encouraging other municipalities and cities in Europe to follow and learn from your work, as well as replicate the stride for accessibility you have undertaken in the city of Zagreb. In layer 3 of your presentation, you mentioned accessible public transport, and I think that's a great foray and kind of lead into the next speaker who will be joining us from the City of London, specifically City Bridge Trust, and James Lee, the founder of said organization, who has been instrumental in including persons with disabilities in the design process and in the process of making public transportation in London more accessible. But no better person to hear it from than himself. So Mr. Lee, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Robin, and I should apologise first. I hope you're not too lonely up there. I was due to fly out to join you the day that I was due to fly. My wife tested positive for COVID, so I did not think it would be very responsible of me. Sorry, I'm getting quite a lot of feedback. That's better. Thank you very much. So yes, unfortunately, my wife tested positive for COVID on the day that I was due to fly to join you there, so I hope you're not too lonely on stage, and I'm sorry that you all have to suffer my face being projected on what I can see as a horrifyingly big screen. But yeah, so my name is James. I myself am a disabled person, or a person with a disability, and I have a number of advisory roles across local government and work with a number of different funding organisations here in the UK. So I'm here to tell you a bit about my work with something called the Independent Disability Advisory Group. So what I'm going to do is I will tell you a little bit about the situation in London. I will tell you about our work to make public transport in London more accessible, and then I'd like to leave you with some questions, some thoughts. Later. And sorry, I'm getting that feedback again. That end. Thank you, that's better. So first, I will tell you all about Transport for London, which is our city's public transport authority, and the work of the Independent Disability Advisory Group, of which I am a member. So to do this, I want to give you a bit of actually operate. So London is a city of around 9.5 million people, and it's growing. It is estimated that before the impact of the pandemic, around 1.3 million journeys were made by disabled people every single day in London. That is a lot of journeys. And you've got to remember that sort of elements of our public transport infrastructure date back well over 100 years. I mean, London was home to the world's first underground railway. And so whilst there's been this continual program of modernization and improvement, you do in places have very old infrastructure, which is supporting a very high number of passengers. The authorities in London have good quality public transport. Enable business, enable pleasure, to access education, healthcare. When it comes to making public more accessible, and in turn, everything the city has to offer more accessible, this is where the role of the Disability Advisory Group provides support. So the independent...
James, it seems that we're having an issue with your microphone. I don't know if you're wearing headless microphones. If you could perhaps, let's try that again.
Okay, let me switch that over.
I think that is a bit better. Please proceed.
To the PC mic and speakers. How is that?
Much better, James. Thank you.
Brilliant. So where was I? So the Independent Disability Advisory Group, it's composed of people with lived experience of disability or health conditions who also bring this professional expertise in access and inclusion. You know, we are engineers, researchers, policy experts who all have this technical expertise to inform and to challenge the decisions that are being made at a very senior level, which affect public transport in London. So we have sight of and we have a say in major projects such as station redesign, policies on assistive travel, the procurement of new trains. So what I thought I would do is tell you 3 of the key principles which make this work so effective. First of all, the composition of the Independent Disability Advisory Group. So as I mentioned before, every person on the advisory group brings a mix of personal and professional experience that is relevant to the role of advising on transport. So we make sure that our criticisms are constructive and our contributions are supported by experience. Secondly, we ensure that the voices of disabled people are heard early and frequently throughout the lifetime of a project. And this is so important. You know, the delivery of any major project can be it's a bit like steering a massive ship, and it's so much easier to avoid the big icebergs if you are informed of their presence sooner rather than later. So the involvement of disabled people or people with disabilities, it shouldn't just be a box that needs to be ticked when a project is nearly ready to be delivered. You know, it's valuable to have those voices at the conception phase and all the way through the execution of a project. And thirdly, the Independent Disability Group does not operate alone. So this group is only 10 people, so we need our allies to help create and to deliver change. You know, we support training to upskill our colleagues across the Transport Authority and help ensure that everybody understands the importance of accessibility and inclusion. And there are advocates at all levels of seniority across local government in London who understand this work. And so we are effective because we are one focus point within a wider culture that understands access and inclusion. And this is why I'm so pleased to hear about the powerful work and the cohesive approach that Geraldine spoke about earlier. And I'm not saying that things in London are perfect, but we are creating a better place as this culture of access and inclusion spreads across the city. But I think that's sort of enough of me talking. I think I said I had some discussion points to leave you with for the Q&A later. So I have a few questions for all of you in the audience. You know, I'd love to hear from you if you have any good or bad examples of the inclusion of disabled people in public transport. I would love to hear from you if you have any similar mechanisms for the engagement of disabled people in determining decisions made where you live. And finally, you know, you've heard a little bit about how we operate in London, but we don't know it all. And if you have suggestions as to how we can make the voice and the inclusion of disabled people even better, and yes, Marinka, I was taking very careful notes when you were talking about your fantastic work in Zagreb, I would love to hear from you. So thank you all for listening.
Thank you, James, and I think you've provided us with a lot of material for the aforementioned Q&A, which I think we all look forward to. And, you know, I was thinking with the Independent Disability Advisory Group, everything really starts with a conversation, and it's facilitating these conversations that our next awardee has done. Namely, the city of Curitiba has developed a weekly conversation in public spaces for citizens in Brazilian Sign Language, namely Libras. And our next speaker will be talking about their project and how they have helped to democratize access to Libras, to spread the word about Brazilian Sign Language and bring everyone in, persons with and without disabilities in the city of Curitiba. And it is my pleasure to welcome Fernanda, Costa, Peixoto, Primo, the coordinator and technical support of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Department staff member at Curitiba City Hall. Fernanda, thank you for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Robin. I'm describe myself first. So I'm a white woman. I have a black reddish hair and I'm wearing a black shirt. So I'm going to talk to you about our program called Conversation Libras. As Robin said, Libras is our Brazilian Sign Language. I'm going to follow some notes here. So this first slide It brings a pre-pandemic photo from when our meetings took place in person. People appeared together, posing for the photo and moving their hands. But Conversation in Libras began in 2018 with the aim of promoting communication accessibility and favoring the inclusion of deaf people. We noticed that many people learned Libras, but as they had no contact with deaf people, they ended up forgetting the language over time. We were looking for a good way to stimulate the knowledge and use of Libras in people's daily lives. With that, the Conversation Libras was created. It is attended by people with all levels of knowledge in Libras, deaf and hearing people together to spread sign language and provide a breakdown of barriers in communication, favoring the social inclusion of deaf people. The next slide, communication accessibility. Yes, this slide, there is a picture of 10 people sitting in a circle and moving their hands. An important use of Conversation Libras was for learning specific signs of some professions. Police officers, first responders, teachers, a variety of people looking to provide more accessibility in their jobs. In addition, the meetings are marked by topics of public interest, current news, and trivia, carried out in a playful way with challenges and previous research by the participants. Next slide, we have deaf protagonists. The slide shows a picture of a woman moving her hands in front of a notebook where several people are video conferencing. Conversation Libras proved to be an important space for the exercise of protagonism by deaf people, contributing to the dissemination of sign language and information about deaf culture. Some deaf people were with us every week, teaching signs, sharing information, perceptions, and experiences. We realized that the conversation group also functioned as a space for community life for deaf people who felt welcome in an inclusive environment which valued them in their specificities. So next slide, we have learning Libras. I'll describe the word. In this slide, there is a picture of 7 people sitting in a circle. A man wears a cap, a woman wears a nun's outfit. So, besides that, we had some situations where Conversation Libras worked as a learning opportunity for deaf people. In the image, a nun participates in the group. She is responsible for a residential institution. The man in the cap in the photo lives at the institution. He is deaf and has never learned Libras, having a hard time communicating, both with hearing and deaf people in this case. They went to the conversation to learn how to communicate, which was very important for the development of the man and for the enrichment of the place of residence, as he and the nun were able to teach some signs to the other residents. Next slide, the participants. In this slide, there's a picture of 25 people posing for a photo together. Some are sitting and some are standing. They raise their hands and smile. Conversation Libras is an inclusive space for those who have never learned Libras, those who have already taken a course and want to practice, those who speak Libras fluently, deaf people including, and even those who work with Libras interpretation. The group recognizes human diversity, having participants of all ages, races, and genders, different disabilities, neurodiverse people, transgender people, people with different religions and culture, valuing their differences. Approximately 4,500 people benefited from Conversation Libras between 2018 and 2020. Next slide is the challenges. This slide shows the screen of a video call. 22 people move their hands over their heads. In 2020, with the pandemic, we had a new challenge. Conversation meetings, which previously took place in our department, began to take place in an online format. The use of technology made access difficult for some more vulnerable people. However, we realized that this became an opportunity to contact people from all over Brazil, significantly increasing the number of participants. People from different places started to attend Conversation Libras, and with the experience, they started to consider creating similar groups in their cities. Next slide, innovative expert. Yes. In this slide, there's a picture of 2 women moving their hands in front of a computer. On the screen, several people video conferencing. Conversation Libras is an innovative action as it is a public strategy that is easily accessible to the population, which does not require adherence to formal courses and allows continuous practice, inserting into people's daily lives the acquisition, maintenance, and improvement of the use of Libras. It also promotes contact between deaf and hearing people in an inclusive and welcoming environment, demystifying issues of deaf culture, communication, and attitudinal accessibility. It is financially viable and easily replicable in different contexts. The last slide, the next steps. In this slide, we have the screen of a video call. 2 women wear costumes, and the face of 7 children appear covered with the image of heart eyes emojis. An important development of Conversation Libras in August 2021 was the launch of the group for children from 7 to 12 years old. Although some children were already sporadically attending the general group, we realized the need for an environment that was more protected from adult matters, and with a more playful and fun dynamic, as you can see in the picture. We had a great demand, with the formation of 2 groups, one for the morning and one for the afternoon. Now we have more children than adults. For the coming years, we intend to encourage the participation of more people, take the conversation to other places in the city of Curitiba, like parks, squares, different boroughs. We also intend to make a hybrid conversation with a face-to-face and online format, contemplating participants from other cities and states in the country. So for now, that's it. The city of Curitiba is very thankful for the opportunity to show just a little bit of our work, and we're really pleased to also to hear about your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, for that wonderful presentation, and looking forward also to get your input in the Q&A. We would like to acknowledge someone who brought the city of Curitiba to our attention, because the Zero Project is only as strong as its network, and that specifically is Victor Pineda and the Cities for All Global Initiative, who has been instrumental in working with the Zero Project, in bringing in their exceptional network of cities, and we're very fortunate to have them as a good and dear partner, and we would love to play a video message from Victor Pineda for this session. And we also have Luis Artieda from the Cities for All Global Initiative team, who will be joining the Q&A later together with James, Marinka, Fernanda, and Geraldine. So I would ask the tech team to please play the video message of Dr. Pineda, and then we'll proceed to Q&A.
Well, thank you so much for having us. Well, thank you. I'm Victor Pineda, president of the Victor Pineda Foundation World Enabled. We are Cities for All. This session is all about co-creating inclusive, accessible, and resilient communities for all. This is something that is a deep commitment for myself as an urban planner, as somebody that helped negotiate the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as an advisor to governments, both local and national governments, on the implementation of the SDGs, specifically SDG 11. Now, SDG 11 talks about building inclusive, resilient, and safe cities. And the targets specifically talk about people with disabilities. However, cities have the capacity to provide something for everyone only because and only when they're created by everyone. That was Jane Jacobs over 50 years ago. And she talks a lot about how important it is to co-create those cities. Now, the Croatia initiative, Accessible Zagreb online services, demonstrates that, as does the Independent Disability Advisory Group at Transport for London, and the Conversation in Libras with the Curitiba City Hall, all of which we've collaborated with in different ways in the past. I want to commend the winners and congratulate them. Svaka vam čast in Croatian, congratulations in English, and felicidade in Portuguese for our colleagues in Curitiba. Now, what I think is going to be important here is to think about how we create a transformation journey. How do we co-create these inclusive, accessible, and resilient communities for all? Well, there are challenges, definitely, that we have to solve. 25% of all people on Earth encounter barriers in cities because of aging or disability, 2 times the rates of poverty, and 2 times the rates of disparity in education, health, and employment. I think when we start to look at this gap, it's a $2 trillion gap of foregone income from excluding people with disabilities. One of the things that we have to consider is that we've made already big commitments. And these commitments are through the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The CRPD is the first core human rights treaty of the 21st century, the most rapidly adopted treaty, and a legally enforceable treaty. This treaty means that local communities and local governments need help. They need partnerships in order to bring this treaty to life. And this treaty fits into what we're doing with the Global Sustainable Development Goals. Together, the CRPD and the SDGs create an overarching commitment for identifying and eliminating barriers to this inclusive and sustainable urban development. Now, we have launched with the German government in 2018 Cities for All. When it comes back to a longer framework, World Enabled and our partners helped negotiate the new urban agenda, an agreement that comes around every 20 years to define the framework for cities. The new urban agenda is going to be reviewed in April, the fifth year review of that process. And the World Urban Forum in Kuala Lumpur was under the theme Cities for All, where they launched the Cities for All Global Compact with DPOs and regional organizations. Persons with disabilities was really a cornerstone and a milestone to have our voices heard. We established new connections and relationships with networks of cities that were one of our founding partners, UCLG, and the Global Compact and Campaign on Inclusive Accessible Cities, and continue that work with the World Urban Forum TED. In Abu Dhabi, where we had a training program for organizations run by persons with disabilities, and also continued that with our COVID response, where over 2,000 people, including mayors and deputy mayors and city officials, participated in creating a framework for an inclusive pandemic response and recovery. We're taking that effort further into the World Urban Forum 12, which is happening in Poland. So, very quickly, our theory of change is to set the agenda through engagement and advocacy, to create policy formulations through evidence-based policy and research and data, and ultimately accelerate adoption of these principles through training and advisory services. UN Habitat, the World Bank, and many other partners have joined the Cities for All network in helping us deliver on these promises. But there's still a lot more work to do. The existing commitments of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, age-friendly cities, the UN Convention, and the Urban Agenda have all been synthesized and simplified into 6 key commitments, 6 key principles: non-discrimination, accessibility, participation, inclusive urban policies and programs, capacity building, and data for development. And cities like New York, Chicago, Berlin, Amman, Curitiba, Lyon, Helsinki, Barcelona have all adopted these principles, and we're looking to many more cities joining in the near future. These principles really strengthen sustainable development goals and activate the capacity of local governments and local NGOs and other stakeholders to really participate in creating this more inclusive urban future. Now, what I'd like to share is the fact that each one of us has a seat at the table. We launched this in Berlin with the government of Germany, but we've continued with other partners around the world to really accelerate this commitment. And we're really proud of our partners and our platform that all understand that we are all accountable to building inclusive and accessible cities, whether we work with regulatory agencies, professional associations, media, academia, and others. Now, what's needed? We need data and groundbreaking research. We need to adopt universal design standards. And we most need to strengthen our platform, Cities for All, as a platform for industry-leading partnerships to amplify and accelerate together training, learning, development, thought leadership tools, advisory services, and inclusive innovation with the private sector. I want to invite you all to join us and be part of this network. We're doing some exciting things with Cities for All coming up. We're launching stories and learnings that matter with UCLG and other partners. With a 6-part training program that will allow you to get a certificate of completion to really understand the main principles and the main challenges and opportunities in bringing these 6 principles, bringing the Global Compact to life. We're also excited to share Amsterdam for All, which is one of our partners to really create ethical and inclusive technology and map out barriers in cities. We want to highlight specifically our great work with University of Washington, which has a project Sidewalk, which is working in Amsterdam as well as other cities to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to identify access barriers in public spaces. We're going to be updating you all on how these developments are advanced over the next few years, and invite you all to take action with us in bringing all of this effort to life. Together we can catalyze local responses to SDG 11, developing new data, new insights, and new actions. But together, we'll strengthen Cities for All to really have cities where we all belong and to have cities that respond to our needs. Ultimately, to have Cities for All, have cities without barriers. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you for your thought leadership, Victor, from drafting the convention of the UNCRPD to working with cities around the world. Your work truly has had impact for decades to come. I would like to jump in directly into your Q&A, since we've had a lot of presentations, but would love to have a conversation along the lines of what James was saying, the good, the bad, the ugly, what has worked well, what has not worked so well. And I wanted to perhaps start the conversation with a question to the entire panel to ask, throughout all your projects, sooner or later, you'll be working with government. And when we hear government, we often think bureaucracy, we think hurdles, we think barriers. And I'm wondering, since you've had success, what are the insights or the anecdotes or the stories you can share which helped you to break through and to have impact? How were you able to achieve and work with government? What pushed your project forward? What is the secret sauce? Where does the success come from in your projects? And what would you like others to know how you did it and how perhaps they can do it as well in their cities? Would anyone like to take that question first? James, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Sure, I'll give you a quick one and then I'll turn to my fellow panelists. So government, often seems like a scary thing for people to get involved with, this daunting, faceless bureaucracy. But I think the reality is that sort of all governments, especially local governments all around the world, they all exist to make things better for the people who they support, for the people that they govern. So ultimately, it's about articulating or expressing the aims of what you want to do in a way that your local government understands and can relate to and can see the value of what you're doing. It doesn't hurt as well if you can demonstrate how it saves the local government money. So if we think about making cities more accessible, we're doing this for a reason. Yes, it is the moral imperative and the right thing to do, but there is also a really comprehensive cost-based analysis as to why making cities more accessible is beneficial for local governments.
Very valid point, James. I'm wondering, Fernanda, what for you was the breakthrough? And in thinking of Libras, when was that eureka moment? When did the light bulbs go up in the Curitiba City Hall when people said, yes, this is something we have to do? Was there a moment you can perhaps share with us?
Yes, I think what makes it easy to happen is that it's financially viable. The barriers when we work in a city hall is always financial. So when we have a strategy that we can bring people and make it happen without demanding money from the city hall, without demanding projects that maybe take 2 years so we can get it approved financially, so it works better, it works faster, and we have this, maybe we can solve some problem in the short term and work in the long term also, but we have for a short term something that's financially viable. I think for us that was what made conversation happen.
Maybe the same question to Marinka, and Luis and Geraldine, feel free to also jump in at any time. Is the economic argument one which is being understood in the city of Zagreb? Was that a driving factor when you implemented your project?
My office, city office, is city office for social protection, health, war veterans, and persons with disabilities. Persons with disabilities are a place for coordination of all projects in the city of Zagreb. It is in accordance with integration model. We have been working on this model 20 years, since 20 years. Our joker is very, very close mutual work with persons with disabilities. They are our really partners, and we are a lobby group for pressure. And I don't know if I professional, if I persons with disabilities, but we are together in all of projects in the city of Zagreb. I'm sure that is the key of our projects. The Accessible Zagreb is only one project, but all our projects are social innovation. We are very orientated into persons with disabilities, other professionals, and private sector, and all of other subjects. And I'm sure that it's enough for start.
Absolutely, Marinka. So effectively bringing together and ensuring that persons with disabilities do not only meet, but come together as a lobby, similar to what James, I think, is doing with the Independent Disability Advisory Group. Luis and Geraldine, I'd love for you to come in and maybe share some good practices you've seen globally and kind of the key factors which have made them successful. We heard about making the economic case from James and Fernanda that, you know, if you can have short-term impact, ideally not costing too much, that it's ideal. We've heard from Marinka and James that bringing together persons with disabilities and giving them agency is a catalyst for that change. And I wanted to hear from you, Luis and Geraldine, what other factors of success you have seen in your work with cities around the world.
Yes, maybe I could come in. Regarding this question related to the link with governments and the national level, I think it's also often missing the link, how to feed in actually, and how the local can actually feed in. So what is really interesting is when cities are developing these kind of policies to really look at the national context. What is the national situation? Is there a national action plan? Is there a review coming ahead? Whether it's linked to a national strategy, whether it's linked to the universal periodic review, whether it's linked to another kind of review, in order to see in which context you can fit in. And I would really recommend that as a city to also showcase your success, demonstrate really how this works. It's very important that your government are informed of this initiative. And it's really important to have allies.
There's a lot of energy in this discussion, and I hate to cut in and be the bearer of bad news, because we've heard so much good news throughout this session. But I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone and to remind them that the conversation doesn't end here. Even though I am cutting off the conversation for time reasons, I encourage you to go to zeroproject.org. All the speakers and all of our awardees you heard from today are there in our Zero Project database. You have fact sheets which outline the solutions, the innovations, and most importantly, have a message function, which will put you in touch with James, which will put you in touch with Marinka, which will put you in touch with Fernanda. You can continue those conversations. You can reach out to even understand better and more in depth about their projects. And Luis, I know you had some input to bring in. I apologize for cutting you off, but our time is short, and I thank everyone for their attention today. Thank you for joining us virtually. I appreciate you giving us the time and the attention to share your work, which hopefully will be replicated around the world. Have a great evening.